The rain fell softly over Kigali as mourners gathered under black umbrellas, watching Chief Adewale Okonkwo's coffin slowly disappear into the wet earth. The sky looked as heavy as Nkechi Okonkwo's heart. She stood there in a soaked black dress, her hands trembling, her mind refusing to accept that her father was really gone. To the world he was a powerful businessman. To her he was safety. He was the one who answered every late-night call, who reminded her she was stronger than she believed. And now, as the last shovel of soil hit the coffin, she didn't just feel grief. She felt unprotected. People cried around her. Some wiped their eyes dramatically. But her husband, Tendai Masiko, barely squeezed her hand. His face was calm. Too calm. His eyes were not swollen from tears. They were distant, thoughtful, calculating. While others mourned, he seemed to be thinking. After the burial, the family returned to the mansion. Relatives filled the rooms with quiet whispers, sympathy and tired sighs. Food was served, prayers were said. But something felt off. Nkechi noticed how Tendai kept checking his phone. How he stepped away to take private calls. How he avoided eye contact whenever someone mentioned her father's legacy. Late that night, when the house finally became silent and everyone went to sleep, Nkechi lay awake staring at the ceiling. The rain continued tapping against the windows. Beside her, Tendai wasn't sleeping either. And in that silence something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough for her to feel it in her bones. At exactly 1:47 a.m., Nkechi's eyes opened suddenly. She didn't know what woke her at first. Then she heard it. A whisper. "Oh, careful. Urgent." Tendai was standing near the balcony door, his back turned to her, phone pressed to his ear. "I told you the transfer is completed," he whispered. "Yes," joint authority confirmed. No delays. Her heart began to beat faster. Transfer? Joint authority? She stayed still, pretending to be asleep, but her mind was fully awake now. His voice didn't sound like a grieving husband. It sounded focused, organized, almost relieved. A cold feeling crept up her spine. Slowly, quietly, she reached for her phone on the bedside table. Her fingers felt weak as she opened her banking app. For a second, everything looked normal. Then the screen refreshed. And her breath stopped. The main account balance was almost empty. She blinked, refreshed again. Her inheritance. Nearly $6.5 million in liquid assets, investments and land shares across Nairobi and Accra, was gone. Transferred into a new corporate holding account she had never seen before. Her hands started shaking as she opened the transaction details. Authorized signatory, Tendai Masiko. Primary controller, Tendai Masiko. Her vision blurred. This wasn't a small withdrawal. This wasn't a mistake. This was everything. The night after her father was buried, her husband had taken control of it all. She felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Her chest tightened, but her mind became strangely clear. This wasn't random. It was planned. The timing was too perfect. While she was greeting mourners. While she was crying at the graveside. While she was hugging relatives and accepting condolences. He had been working. Tendai ended the call and stood still for a moment, staring into the dark. Then he turned slightly, checking if she was awake. Nkechi quickly closed her eyes and slowed her breathing. He walked back to the bed and lay down beside her like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just rewritten her entire life in one night. Tears slid silently down her temples into her hair, but she didn't make a sound. Grief was no longer the only pain in her chest. Now there was betrayal. And something else. A quiet realization that the man sleeping next to her might have never truly been on her side at all. 3 years earlier, Nkechi truly believed she had married the right man. Their wedding in Lagos was something people still talked about. A huge ballroom filled with white roses, gold lights, live music and powerful guests from across Africa. Tendai stood beside her in a perfectly tailored suit, smiling like he had just won the greatest prize of his life. And at that time she believed she was the prize he loved. He was charming. That was the word everyone used. He knew how to speak in a way that made people feel important. He opened doors for her. He sent thoughtful messages during the day. He talked about building an empire together. He said things like, "Your father built something great. We will build something even greater." It sounded supportive. It sounded romantic. Looking back now, those words felt different. Her father had always been polite to Tendai but careful. Observing. Watching. One evening, months before the wedding, he had called Nkechi into his office. His voice was calm, not angry. "My daughter," he said gently, "a man who studies your wealth more than your heart is dangerous." She had laughed it off. She thought it was just an older man being protective. She told him Tendai loved her, not her money. She accused her father of not trusting her judgment. He didn't argue. He simply nodded and said, "I pray I am wrong." Now those words echoed in her mind like a warning siren she had ignored. When she replayed their relationship in her head, small details started to stand out. The way Tendai always asked detailed questions about her father's companies. The way he insisted on understanding the structure of her trusts and assets, just to help. The way he sometimes got quiet whenever conversations shifted away from business and toward emotions. Had he been planning all this from the beginning? Had he been patient, waiting for the one moment when her protection would be gone? Lying awake that night after discovering the transfer, Nkechi felt something break inside her. Not just trust, not just love, the belief that her marriage had been safe. And for the first time she allowed herself to ask the question she was afraid of. Did he ever truly marry her? Or did he marry the future he saw attached to her name? The next morning, Nkechi did something that surprised even herself. She acted normal. She got dressed calmly. She told Tendai she needed fresh air and wanted to check on a few foundation matters. He looked at her for a second, almost studying her face, then nodded. "Take your time," he said smoothly. Her stomach turned at how relaxed he sounded. Instead of going anywhere random, she drove straight to her father's longtime lawyer, Barrister Kayamaka Nwosu. The office felt familiar. Dark wooden shelves, organized files, the quiet smell of paper and polish. It was a place where her father made serious decisions. Important decisions. Kayamaka greeted her warmly at first, offering condolences again. But when Nkechi quietly asked for a full review of any recent changes to her inheritance structure, the lawyer's expression shifted. "Recent changes?" she asked carefully. Within minutes, files were pulled up on the computer. Digital records, timestamps, authorization logs. And then Nkechi saw it. 3 weeks before her father's death, amended financial documents had been submitted. The paperwork granted Tendai temporary financial coordination rights over all major assets if Nkechi was deemed emotionally unfit to manage them during a period of distress. Emotionally unfit. The words felt like an insult. Her chest tightened as she scrolled further. Authorized by Nkechi Okonkwo. Digital signature. Verified. Her hands went cold. "I never signed this," she whispered. Kayamaka's face grew serious. She zoomed in on the digital authentication trail. IP addresses. Device verification. Submission time. The submission had been made late at night. From their home network. The room suddenly felt smaller. "This is not a minor adjustment," Kayamaka said carefully. "This is strategic. Whoever did this knew exactly how to position it. It would activate automatically under emotional distress, like after a death. It was planned. Not random. Not emotional. Planned. Forgery. Calculated. Timed. Ruthless." Nkechi felt anger rising now, slowly replacing the shock. He hadn't just moved money in the middle of the night. He had prepared the legal ground weeks before her father passed away. He had anticipated this moment. The betrayal felt deeper than the financial theft. He had tried to legally label her as unstable, incapable, weak, and he thought she would never notice. As she sat there in her father's lawyer's office, grief turned into something sharper. Clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding between husband and wife. This was a trap. And he had underestimated the one thing her father had truly given her. The ability to think calmly when everything felt like it was falling apart. That evening, the house felt unusually quiet. The relatives had either left or locked themselves in guest rooms. The staff moved carefully, sensing tension in the air. Nkechi waited until they were alone in the living room before she spoke. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him and said, "Why did you transfer my inheritance?" Tendai didn't panic. He didn't even look surprised. He leaned back on the sofa slowly, crossed one leg over the other and smiled. Not a nervous smile. A controlled one. "You're grieving," he said gently, almost like he was explaining something to a child. "You're not thinking clearly. I'm protecting what's ours." Ours. The word sounded wrong now. "You moved $6.5 million in the middle of the night," she replied calmly. "Without telling me." He sighed as if she was being dramatic. "It's temporary. The structure needed to be secured. Your father trusted me." The way he said it, confident, smooth, almost made it believable. Almost. But Nkechi didn't look away. "Then why did you forge my signature?" For the first time something shifted in his face. The smile faded. His jaw tightened. His fingers, resting on his knee, curled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had lost its softness. She stepped closer. "The amended paperwork. The emotional unfit clause. Submitted 3 weeks ago. From our home network." Silence. And in that silence she saw him clearly. Not the charming husband from Lagos. Not the supportive partner who talked about building an empire together. She saw calculation. She saw entitlement. She saw a man who truly believed she would never question him. That grief would keep her distracted. That heartbreak would make her weak. "You wouldn't have understood the legal language," he said finally, irritation slipping through. "I simplified things." Simplified. He had labeled her emotionally unstable. He had positioned himself to control everything. And he expected her to accept it quietly. That was the moment the mask slipped completely. His eyes were no longer warm. They were cold. Defensive. Almost annoyed that she had figured it out so quickly. "You're overreacting," he added sharply. "Everything I do is for us." Well, everything he did was for control. And as he sat there trying to regain his polished composure, he didn't realize something important. He thought her grief made her fragile. But it had actually made her fearless. And he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, underestimating her. What Tendai didn't know, and never even thought to check, was that Chief Adewale was not just successful. He was meticulous. Extremely meticulous. The kind of man who read every line of every contract twice. The kind of man who planned 5 steps ahead even in family matters. Nkechi remembered something her father once told her. Wealth is not protected by trust. It is protected by structure. At the time she didn't fully understand what he meant. Now she was about to. When Barrister Nwosu dug deeper into the inheritance files, she found something buried inside the trust framework. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and strategic, just like her father. There was a private clause written into the core trust agreement. It stated that if any spouse attempted unilateral control, transfer, or restructuring of major assets within 30 days of the account holder's death, all holdings would immediately freeze. Not partially, completely. The assets would then revert to an independent oversight board. And the chairperson of that board? Nkechi Okonkwo. Tendai had studied the surface of the system. He thought he understood it. But he had never seen the foundation her father built underneath. The moment he initiated the midnight transfer into that corporate holding account, the system flagged it. Quietly. Automatically. No drama. No warning to him. 48 hours later, while Tendai was making confident phone calls and acting in control, the bank compliance department executed the freeze. His new corporate account was locked. Outgoing transactions suspended. Incoming transactions restricted. Access under review. He found out when one of his business associates called him in confusion. A payment hadn't gone through. Then another call came. And another. By the afternoon, investigators from the bank's fraud and compliance unit had formally requested documentation regarding the amended signatures. Digital authentication logs were under forensic review. Questions were being asked. Not by Nkechi. By institutions. By systems her father had carefully designed. That evening Tendai's confidence looked different. He was pacing. Checking his phone repeatedly. Making urgent calls that were no longer calm. Meanwhile, Nkechi sat quietly in her father's old study, reading the trust documents herself. For the first time since the funeral she felt something steady inside her. Her father hadn't just left her money. He had left her protection. And Tendai had just walked straight into a trap he didn't even know existed. In Kigali, news doesn't stay quiet for long. Especially not in elite business circles. What started as a routine compliance review at the bank quickly became whispers among auditors, board members and longtime associates of Chief Adewale. People began connecting the dots. A massive inheritance. A sudden transfer. A frozen corporate account. Something wasn't right. Tendai started noticing the shift almost immediately. Calls that were usually returned within minutes now went unanswered. A lunch meeting with a potential investor was suddenly postponed. One of his closest business partners sent a short, careful message. Let's pause any joint ventures until this issue clears. Pause. That word hit harder than any accusation. By the end of the week, an emergency family meeting was called at the mansion. Senior relatives flew in. Foundation board members attended. The atmosphere in the main sitting room felt heavy, like a courtroom without a judge. Tendai arrived dressed sharply as always. Suit pressed. shoes polished, chin lifted. He still believed he could talk his way through it. Barrister Kayamaka Nwosu stood calmly near the head of the table with a file in her hand. Nkechi sat beside her, quiet but composed. She didn't look broken anymore. She looked focused. When the forensic report was presented, the room went completely silent. Digital logs showed the amended documents had been submitted from Tendai's registered device. The timestamps matched nights when Nkechi was out of town. The IP address traced back to their home network. Even the layered authentication steps showed manual overrides. It wasn't speculation. It was evidence. A cousin gasped softly. One of the elder uncles removed his glasses slowly, disappointment written all over his face. Tendai tried to interrupt. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "I was protecting the family assets." But his voice lacked its usual confidence. Because this time he wasn't charming investors at a gala. He was facing facts. As the lawyer calmly explained the findings, Tendai's posture changed. His shoulders dropped slightly. His jaw tightened. The polished strategist image began to crack. For the first time in the room, he wasn't the man in control. He wasn't the visionary businessman. He wasn't even the grieving son-in-law. He was the accused. And everyone could see it. That night, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield. The moment the doors closed behind them, Tendai exploded. "So this is what you've been doing?" he snapped, pacing across the living room. "Turning lawyers against your own husband? Embarrassing me in front of your family?" Nkechi stood near the staircase, calm but firm. "I didn't turn anyone against you. You did that yourself." He laughed bitterly. "Everything I did was for our future. Do you think businesses run on emotions? I was protecting what belongs to us." He kept using that word like it was a shield. "You forged my signature," she said quietly. "You labeled me emotionally unfit. I had to act fast," he shouted. "You were grieving. You weren't thinking clearly." There was again. The belief that she was weak. That sadness made her incapable. For a moment his anger turned into something else. Desperation. "Do you know how hard it is to step into your father's shadow?" he said. "Everyone sees you as the heiress. I needed authority. I needed control to stabilize things. Control. Not partnership. Not protection. Control." The argument grew louder. Words flew across the room like sharp objects. He accused her of humiliating him, of destroying his reputation, of choosing money over marriage. But Nkechi wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't doubting herself. She wasn't trying to defend his actions in her mind like she used to. She saw the pattern clearly now. The charm, the patience, the strategic questions about her father's assets, the quiet preparation weeks before the funeral. He hadn't fallen in love and built a life with her. He had positioned himself, carefully, strategically, like a man waiting for the right moment to step forward and claim something he believed he deserved. And the most shocking part? Her grief had not broken her. It had sharpened her instincts. It had removed the emotional fog. It had forced her to see without excuses. As Tendai stood there blaming her for everything, Nkechi felt something inside her finally settle. This wasn't just a fight between husband and wife. This was the end of an illusion. And for the first time since her father's death, she felt stronger than she had ever felt before. Within a week, Nkechi made her decision. There were no more arguments. No more late-night discussions. No more pretending. She filed for legal separation quietly and formally. The papers were delivered without drama. Clear, direct, final. But she didn't stop there. This was no longer just about a broken marriage. It was about fraud. It was about forged signatures, manipulated documents, and a calculated attempt to take control of her inheritance during the most vulnerable moment of her life. So she pressed charges. Financial fraud, identity manipulation, digital forgery. When the investigation became official, things moved quickly. Bank compliance teams shared their findings with regulatory authorities. The forensic report from the trust documents was submitted as evidence. The digital trail was clean and undeniable. Tendai's professional licenses were suspended pending investigation. His ability to sit on corporate boards was frozen. Investors pulled back. Partnerships dissolved quietly but firmly. Invitations to elite business events stopped coming. The same circles that once praised him now avoided his name in conversations. His reputation, once polished and respected, began to unravel publicly. Headlines didn't need to scream. The silence around him said enough. Meanwhile, Nkechi did something no one expected. She didn't hide. She stepped forward. She moved into her father's restored office overlooking Kigali's skyline. The same desk. The same view. But this time she was the one sitting in the chair. Board meetings resumed, with her leading them. The family foundation projects that had slowed after her father's death were restructured and strengthened. She personally reviewed expansion plans into Ghana and South Africa, focusing on education and women-led business initiatives. People who once saw her as just the heiress began to see something else. Leadership, strength, clarity. At events, she spoke calmly about accountability, structure, and protecting generational wealth. She didn't mention Tendai directly. He didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder. The woman who stood in the rain at her father's funeral feeling exposed was no longer there. In her place stood someone sharper, steadier, unafraid. Grief had not destroyed her. It had refined her. It had burned away illusion and left behind power. Months had passed since the whirlwind of betrayal, legal battles, and revelations. The city of Kigali stretched out beneath her like a living map, lights flickering in the distance as the sun began to set. Nkechi stood at the large window of her father's restored office, hands resting lightly on the polished wooden desk, the same desk where Chief Adewale once planned his empire. The room smelled faintly of paper, polish, and history, a scent that now felt like hers. She let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything she had endured lift slightly. The grief that had once made her feel small and exposed now felt like fuel. Every late-night conversation, every forged document, every calculated betrayal had shaped her, sharpened her, made her stronger. Her eyes swept over the skyline, the city where her father had built his legacy. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "He thought burying my father meant burying my protection." Her voice was steady, firm, carrying no sadness, only clarity. "But my father didn't leave me money. He left me wisdom." It wasn't just words. It was truth she could feel in her bones. The trust, the structure, the foresight her father had embedded in every decision had guided her, even when everything else seemed lost. Tendai's betrayal, the legal battles, the public scrutiny, none of it could shake the foundation he had given her. She turned slightly, eyes meeting the camera as if daring the world to underestimate her again. The gaze was calm but unyielding, a mixture of intelligence, resolve, and quiet power. She was no longer the grieving daughter, fragile and uncertain. She was the heiress her father had raised her to be, formidable, unshakable, and in full control of her life and her legacy. The skyline blurred softly as the camera pulled back, and in that moment, Nkechi's steady figure framed by the golden light of Kigali, it was clear. Nothing, not grief, not betrayal, not ambition from others, could break her again. She was unstoppable,